going on, everybody? Happy Monday. I don't know if anybody's ever said happy Monday to anybody, but here we are, happy Monday. I had to kind of postpone last night's stream. Feeling a little. I like the people say the term under the weather. I don't know what the hell that means. Uh, I don't understand that, but I feel like that's the technical term or the PC term to use for when somebody feels like shit. Um, So I decided to postpone instead of trying to drag my half dead ass onto a stream last night and trying to crank something out because I wanted to give I want to give Dario and George um, a proper stream. I love Dario Argento. Everybody knows I love George Romero, and I didn't want to come on here last night and be like, I'd be like one of the fucking living dead myself. So here I am tonight. I feel much better. And I wasn't even like last night. I wasn't even like sick. I wasn't like hugging the toilet or anything, puking or shitting or whatever. It was just more of like a heavy weight was on me. Like I just felt exhausted. I just felt down. I had like a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know if you ever experienced that, but where you just have that like this nasty flavor swirling around in your mouth all night. Um, I thought maybe I had the SARS-CoV-2 again, whatever. Um, but no, I feel better today. I think I was just having a shitty day yesterday, and I kind of felt shitty all day today, but kind of worked my way out of the funk and got on here tonight, and yeah, just want to talk about George and Dario, and I think it's we'll touch on it later, but I think it's pretty safe to say. Maybe a little controversial, I don't know, but safe to say that the movie that we all love and know as Dawn of the Dead would not happen without Dario Argento. Dario kind of made it all come together. I mean, I think George kind of had the basic idea, the premise in his head. He wanted to do another. Like at first, I know when he did Night of the Living Dead, he didn't want to do another one. He didn't want to be known as a horror guy, which he eventually became known as a horror guy. But especially through the '70s. I mean, he went from Night of the Living Dead to There's Always Vanilla, which are two vastly different films. Season of the Witch, which gets pegged as a horror film, it's not really. It's I really don't know what you would categorize it as. I mean, I guess you could put it in the horror section, but it's not a movie about witches. Or I mean, I guess it is, but I mean, it's not like she's riding around on broomsticks and wearing funny hats, or at least she's not wearing or riding around on broomsticks. I don't know if anybody's a fan of Christopher Guest, but you'll get that. And then the Crazies, I think that's more sci-fi, maybe a little, horror elements here and there. Martin, I guess you can call it a horror film, but it's definitely an elevated horror film. I think that was one of the original elevated horror films. I watched the whole thing on Joe Bob did on elevated horror the other day, and it was just like, elevated horror, quote unquote, has been around since the beginning. So I don't know, but so yeah, he didn't want to come around and do a sequel to Night of the Living Dead right away. Dario kind of came to him and said, "Hey, I'd be interested in funding another Night of the Living Dead if you're willing to do it." And I think at that point, George kind of had the idea in his head. I think he went and toured the mall shortly before that, or maybe it was a few years before Dario came around, because I know he started early treatments and early ideas for Dawn of the Dead back in probably the early to mid '70s. Funny enough, I think Ray Lane was originally supposed to play Roger. So I mean, it's that time period. It's There's Always Vanilla, Season of the Witch. Around that time period, George kind of started getting somewhat of an idea of what he would want to do with a sequel if he ever did it. So it all kind of came together, and Dario, kind of made it happen. He said, we'll put up money if whatever you guys can raise, we'll match, and we'll split it right down the middle. I'll take the rights for non-English speaking countries. You take the rights for all the English speaking countries, and we got Dawn of the Dead. So we'll go into it. We'll talk about Dario's cut. What I think of it. What do you guys think of it? The Goblin score, which is used far more in Dario's version than it is George's. There is some, goblin in George's version, of course, but I mean, it's just wall to wall goblin in Dario's version. Is it better? Is it worse? Everybody has their opinions on it. Um, but yeah, we'll get into that here in a little bit. I got a couple other things I wanted to do before we really, get into it. 'Cause I'd like to talk about just Dario and his career and some of his films, um, as it is. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kind of talk about Dario Argento and Italian horror for a second. But I do have a couple of items that I got in the mail last week. Actually, I was kind of waiting to kind of open them and do it on here because as we learned in Diary of the Dead, if it doesn't have it on camera, it doesn't really happen. Um, so I figured I'd open those up. We'll see what we got. I will say it's a couple of Martin related items. Nothing major, nothing crazy. Just a couple of cool things that either I didn't have or something that I've never seen and just wanted to get just because I'm probably never going to see it again. So we'll dig into that here in just a second as well. But yeah, no other news on the Twilight of the Dead front so far. No directors named or anything like that. I'm waiting to see. I mean, they made a pretty big deal about the film coming out and who they're going to get to direct, and they said they were in negotiations with the director. So I mean, we're waiting to see who that is because I think it's going to tell us a whole lot about that film and whether it's even going to happen. If they come out and say like Tony Jackson that directed this some home movies back in the mid 2000s is attached, and I have no hope for it. I'm not saying it necessarily has to be like an Edgar Wright or something like that, like we were talking about, or a Guillermo del Toro, but just somebody with some credits to their name, something you can go and see and be like, okay, is this going to work? Is it not? But so yeah, we're still kind of waiting around to see what we're going to get on that front. I've been working on planning on having something pretty cool coming out. I know probably my two most popular things that I've put up on my channel are the two Dawn of the Dead commentaries, the one with Tom Savini and Christine Romero, and of course George Romero from the Dawn of the Dead Laserdisc in the mid 90s, and then also put up another one that was released in 99, I believe, on the UK DVD with Tom Savini and Christian Stavrakis. I have another Dawn of the Dead commentary that I'd like to put up on my channel just because it's one that I had never heard until maybe a couple of years ago. But it's really, really good. It's two guys that I love hearing from. It was featured. I just came across it doing a little research on for this stream. Went back and listened to it again. This is the second time I've listened to it, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, it's the Italian Argento cut of Dawn of the Dead, Zombi, with commentary from Michael Gornick, Tom Dubinsky, and Lee Carr. If you know who Lee Carr is, he's kind of the big guy that knows anything and everything there is to know about George Romero and his films. He did the Day of the Dead, the Making of Day of the Dead book. He just released the Making of Creepshow 2 in cooperation with Michael Gornick. I mean, the guy is just a wealth of knowledge, and you'll hear it on that commentary. So I'd love to get that up at some point because I mean, it's one of those things. It's one of those commentaries I think was released one time in France. So a lot of people here in the States haven't heard it, and that was kind of the original idea of why I even started this channel, was to just kind of start putting stuff up that I know people like me and fans of George and that haven't had the opportunity to see or listen to, and maybe unless it gets struck down by YouTube or something, which has happened. There have been a couple of things that I've tried to put up here, and they're like, no. But that's the game we play. That's the game we play here. Beautiful Scotch. It's one of my favorite lines. Speaking of Argento from Tenebrae, the detective he's got this guy say, "I only drink on duty." He drinks the Scotch. He's like, "Oh, beautiful Scotch." Anyway, yeah, I'm having a little bit of Scotch tonight. Kind of warm up my vocal cords, if you will. But yeah, so yeah, I got that coming down the pipeline. I think that's going to be a pretty fun commentary for people to listen to. 'Cause, I mean, I mean, the guys that were on set for pretty much every day of shooting were in. I mean, it's Gornick and Dubinsky. I mean, they were behind the camera for every shot. I think maybe a little bit of second unit stuff was probably shot by Nick Mastandria. But I mean, like 99% of Dawn of the Dead. I mean, Gornick and Dubinsky were there. And I mean, if you talk to them today, they're a wealth of knowledge. Um, I mean, Dubinsky especially. I mean, the guy's like an encyclopedia. He remembers every little. It's crazy. I mean, it's been what 45 years now. He remembers every little detail about when we shot this, what night, what the weather was like, what issues we had, blah 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 blah. Dubinsky knows, and Gornick is. I mean, they're just haven't missed a beat. So it's a cool commentary. I'm gonna try to get that on here for you guys at some point if I can figure out the technical aspects of it. Because like I said, I'm still working on some ancient fucking technology over here. I'm just old school, and that's just the easiest way that I know how to do things. Like I'm just figuring out StreamYard and stuff. I mean, it's fairly simple stuff, but you know, uh, editing and taking audio from something and matching it to video, and it's a little bit of a process, but yeah, that's just the way. I mean, I just choose to do things the hard way, I guess. Like I don't know, but let's go ahead and let's see what I got in the mail. You guys want to watch me open my mail? What the fuck is this shit? I love that term. You guys want to watch me open my mail? That's a whole subgenre on YouTube right now. Is you can sit and watch people open their mail, see what they got. A lot of people a lot of people like to watch videos of people that buy Blu-rays and 4Ks and just look at the covers and shit. They never watch them or know anything about the fucking movies. They're just like, I bought this because it came out. Maybe that's my next move. Maybe I'll just start doing that. I'll just start buying shit and being like, look what I got. And that's the video. That seems to be popular. Fuck, I might, I'll probably do more. I couldn't do that though. I'd rather just come on here and just babble and fucking talk about George Romero for for hours on end. Um, I don't know. I'd rather do that than whatever be the more popular option, I guess, for YouTube. So let's open this first. It's like Christmas. Got a package. I got both of these on eBay, fairly cheap. Like I said, both Martin related. Two things I didn't have. This is I know what this is. I haven't ever looked. I don't think I've ever seen it out in the wild. Even if I had, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd have bought it. But even years ago when it came out. But and I wouldn't like doing that, being like a YouTuber that just opens shit and shows it off. Like I like to do it on here just because it gives me some content, and I think if you're watching this video, you're obviously a George Romero psychopath like I am, and you're probably interested in whatever the hell I got. But all right, bubble wrap. I'm sure my daughter will love this, so I'm gonna set it to the side. And I'm not sure what year this came out, but it is what year? 97. So this is very, very old. It's a Martin. I think it's Anchor Bay. Yeah, Anchor Bay and Video Treasures. Martin VHS tape, and it opens up. It's got the little flap here. That's one of the main reasons I got it. I mean, A, it was cheap, and B, I love, like, there's a Dawn of the Dead 2-tape VHS release. I think that probably came out right around the same time that has this. You open it up. There isn't any magic. And of course, you got the little blurbs here from. If I can get a better look. Little stuff from Washington Post. some little reviews here. Not bad, not bad. Pretty cool, pretty good shape actually for something that came out in '97. Yeah, just it looks a lot like the Dawn of the Dead release. But yeah, did just something I didn't have, something I found on eBay for fairly cheap and decided to pick it up. So pretty cool. It's got some special features on it. Digitally mastered from a Virgin 35 millimeter print, the film is presented full frame in its original aspect ratio. Yeah, that's the thing about Martin too. I know a lot of people, especially when that 4K from Second Sight came out, people kind of complained about the quality of the film and all that. But I mean, it is supposed to be original full framed. It's not supposed to be wide framed. So I forget the dimensions or whatever the aspect ratios or whatever. 4:3, I think, is what it would be. But that's how the film's supposed to be watched. Um, so yeah, pretty cool. And of course, came out in '97 before I even was aware of Romero, and I'd never seen this. So collector's edition. I'm not sure how many of these are out there, but yeah, you can find them on eBay for fairly cheap. But it was just something I didn't have, something I wanted. So what the hell not? Something else to make room for up here on the shelf. And the second thing here. Oh, shit. Maybe I should cover that up. I don't want people sending anthrax or a bomb to my house. Or if you want to send me shit, you can. Send me a gift. Just no anthrax, no bombs. Don't shit in a box and mail it to me. So this is something that I have never seen because it's not a legit. I don't know what you'd call it. Legitimate piece of advertisement or whatever. This thing's taped up like a motherfucker, though. Let's see if this is as cool as I thought. I think so. I found this on eBay. Somebody was selling this. Apparently, this is I guess like a homemade DIY punk rock flyer for a screening that a college was doing of Martin back in the early 80s. So this thing is probably 40-ish years old at this point. It's in fantastic shape. If it is what it is, I mean, I paid not much for it. So if it's bullshit and somebody printed this out on their, on their printer, a couple weeks ago or whatever, that's one thing. But I just love the look of it. I guess they did a screening at, I think it was Santa Cruz. I think this is where this is from, Santa Cruz, California. So I don't know if there's a college there. I'm not too familiar with California geography, but yeah, I guess these were the flyers that they were putting up around me. It looks like a punk rock flyer. I mean, this looks like something you'd see like the fucking I don't know. Think of a punk rock band from that time period off the top of my head. But yeah, it's got a very punk look. I like it. Wednesday. It's kind of hard to read. I guess the address is 110 Kresge Crease. I think it says Kresge. And it's free to get in, so that'd have been pretty cool. And I guess this is probably around that time period when Soft Cell's version of Martin, or the song Martin, which is a song pretty much about the film. If you haven't heard it, check it out. It's by the band Soft Cell that does Tainted Love. Tainted Love. Whoa. They did a song called Martin, and it's basically about the film. Well, yeah, I think this is super cool. Totally framing this up, putting it on the wall. I love shit like this. It's something unique. It's something that not a lot of people are going to have. If anybody, I don't know who else would have something like this. But yeah, I really like it. It's pretty damn cool. So, showing that off, little show and tell here. And there's not a lot of Martin memorabilia out there. Like, I don't think I've ever seen an actual Martin one sheet. I mean, I know that they exist. I know you can definitely find some from overseas. I know the UK has one that you can find fairly often, but in the US, like finding an actual Martin one sheet is close to impossible. And I know some pretty big collectors of that stuff, and they still haven't found one. So I don't even know if they exist. Um, I mean, I'm pretty sure that there's something out there. I mean, there are different, you know, there's smaller advertisements, there's smaller posters and stuff like that. But like an actual official one sheet, like Don had, or pretty much any Romero film ever had, I don't you don't see a lot of them for Martin. So like I said, it's hard to find a lot of Martin memorabilia and Martin stuff to really collect and put up. Because I mean, it was just this small little film that not a lot of people saw when it came out. But I mean, just kind of transition into our conversation tonight. It was a film I think that Argento saw when he came. I'm trying to remember the story. I think he was in New York premiering Suspiria in the U.S. And I think that was the first time he saw Martin and loved it. And that's what kind of inspired him to reach out to George to tell him how much he enjoyed Martin and how he would be interested in financing another Living Dead film. Um, and of course, I mean, Lampier, Argento eventually took Martin and kind of gave it the Dawn of the Dead treatment and kind of recut it, put a Goblin soundtrack wall to wall to it, and released it overseas as Lampier. May specifically be Italy. I'm not sure if it was released as Lampier otherwise. I don't know a lot about that film. It's one of those. It's just like you can't find any. I've done as much research as I could do, um, and there's just not a lot of information. How did it come about? How did Argento get a hold um, of the film? Was it part of the agreement um, when he agreed to help finance Dawn? I don't know. I don't. There's not a lot out there. But yeah, if anybody knows, let me know in the comments. If you have any information on that, because I can't find it. I don't know much about it. Not a lot of people have seen it or even knew that it existed. It was one of those. It was a special feature on the UK DVD release of Martin from Arrow Video. It was like a special feature that was on there, and I actually it's on my channel now. If you haven't seen Argento's cut of Martin, titled Vampire with the goblins. I mean, it's a completely different film than Martin. I mean, it's even more so, you know, more out of left field than his cut of Dawn. There's way out of sequence. There's he, you just have to see it. I mean, it's a trip. I love the score though, the Goblin soundtrack. I love Goblin period anyway. It could be a complete shit show of a film, but the Goblin score I know is going to be fantastic. But yeah, if you haven't checked that out, check it out. It's different. It's weird. It's a different vibe. It's definitely Italian. It's definitely made or cut for the Italians. Um, but yeah, I don't know how that came about. I don't know what the agreement was on that or why Argento felt the need to re-edit it. Would that not work in Italy the way that it was? I don't know. I know that Argento's cut of Dawn, I think a lot of it. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, we just cut out a lot of the comedic aspects of it," and I think the Dawn cut that Argento did was more so for overdubbing purposes and whatnot. It's easier when you have an action piece to cut out a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the stuff like that, so you don't have to do too much overdubbing. Which is kind of the same thing with Argento's Deep Red in the U.S. When it was released here in the U.S. as Deep Red, it was cut by about 20 minutes or so, 15-20 minutes. and all that was there because if you watch the actual Italian cut of Profondo Rosso, um, there's just, the stuff that was cut out was just more of the character building, the dialogue, stuff like that. And it works both ways. In the U.S., it's easier just to cut a lot of that shit out and keep the kills and the gore and all that closer together, and there's a lot less to overdub. Um, so yeah, I think it works both ways that way. I think that's why Argento, but with Martin, I'm not sure why. It's a weird cut, especially if you've seen Martin as much as I have. It's definitely a trip, something completely out of left field. But let's let's talk about Dario for a little bit here. Uh, of course, on my channel 2 nights ago, I put up the Dario Argento and Eye for Horror documentary, which I originally saw on IFC. I mean, this is kind of a running theme here lately. This shit that I watched on IFC back in the day. But like I said, the the Halloween season on IFC back in the day, you couldn't beat it. I mean, one year, which is the most formative year of my life as a horror fan, a Romero fan, a film fan, whatever. It's 2000. I want to say, yeah, it was definitely 2000. The first time that I saw The American Nightmare, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead, which I'd seen Dawn of the Dead before, and I think I'd seen Texas Chainsaw before, but those were the ones that I could actually like record them on a VCR and rewatch them because they were just on TV. And then the following year, it was maybe the following year or the year after that, they did Italian Screams, which was kind of the same concept, independent horror films from the 70s and 80s, but it was all Italian. I mean, it was Argento, it was Bava. It was the first time I had seen Suspiria, the first time I had seen Tenebrae, which are my two absolute favorite Argento films. Um, it was the first time I'd seen Bay of Blood by Mario Bava. I think they played Baron Blood, Black Sunday. The great Italian horror films at that time. I think Inferno. I definitely remember seeing Inferno on IFC that during that time period. And I remember it was all hosted by Savini as well. Tom Savini was the host that year. But they played this documentary. I think there was two documentaries actually. There was one for Argento and one for Bava. I saw the one for Argento. I don't know to this day if I've ever seen the Mario Bava um, documentary that they played on IFC, it's kind of the same. It was about an hour long, and it was just kind of a quick retrospective of their entire careers. But the Argento one is the one that I saw, and it just kind of captured my imagination because I had never heard of Argento before that. Like I said, this is 2001, 2002. I was probably 13, 14 years old. Grew up on horror. I grew up on Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers and Hellraiser and all that shit. But I wasn't aware of giallo films and Italian horror and Argento and all that. So when that came about, I watched that documentary and I was like, well, what is this? This seems like horror from like another world. And that's the thing about Argento. You can't I know some people love Argento and some people just do not get it. Some people don't like it. I totally understand people that don't get it because it's Argento. Even to this day, the stuff he just released a film a couple of years ago called Dark Glasses. Um, to this day, Dario he does films the way he wants to do them. He creates his own world. Dario's world is not reality. Like the world that he creates, and I should say, the world that he creates in his films is not based in reality. Suspiria, even fairly straightforward. Like I think that's what separated his giallo films from the other giallo films that were taking place at the time. They felt like dreamlike. They were just like, where is this? Like this doesn't feel familiar. The sets don't look like anything that we'd ever seen. Which, as Americans, I mean, I'm sure if you grew up in Rome or in that area, you're probably familiar. Maybe it plays differently. I'm not sure, but even if that's the case, I mean, nobody captured that essence of Italy and Rome and the way that Argento did in his films, or does. I guess he's still making fucking movies. He was born in 1940, so how old is Dario now? Oh boy, I just backed myself into a corner and forced myself to do some math. He's 83, 83 at this point, I believe. If I'm fucking that math up, I apologize. But I think it's 83, right? Yeah, I'm gonna say he's 83. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah. He was born the same year as George, um, which is why I guess they had a bond. They were the same age. They were coming up at the exact same time. I mean, George made Night in '68. Dario makes Bird with Crystal Plumage in '68, and they both just kind of came up together. George in the U.S., Dario in Italy. Um, they really mirrored each other and they really admired each other's work. I mean, George, he was fairly outspoken. He was not a huge horror fan. He grew up, he always talks about he grew up with, EC Comics and he loved, science fiction, The Thing from Another World, Howard Hawks, shit like that. George grew up liking that kind of stuff. But when George was making films, I don't feel like George, especially in the '80s. I remember he would speak out about, I could never make a Friday or a Nightmare on Elm Street or something like that. It just didn't appeal to George. And when we watch his films, we can see why. George, wanted to do more with the horror genre than just scare you and as Hal Holbrook put it, George made. I love the way he put this. I say this all the time now to this day. He's like, George's horror films were different. He didn't just make scary horror pictures. Scary horror pictures. There's always something more going on there. But the same can be said with Dario. Dario's films, like I said, Dario is. When you're watching an Argento film, you just have to submit to the fact that you're watching an Argento film. You just have to submit to it. You gotta say, look, a lot of this stuff may not make sense to me. If you're trying to base this in the real world with the way that the world works, even a lot of Argento's kills are just like stuff that's just like super creative and out there. But like when you think about it on the surface, make no sense. But it's so cool and visually just like how who thinks of this shit? Like the perfect example, the scene in Suspiria, when the girl is running from the killer and she's climbing through the window, and none of it doesn't make any sense that this would be a thing. But they're in the ballet school. She climbs through the window and she jumps down and she lands in just a big pile of razor wire. Why there's a room in this building with a giant pile of razor wire, I don't know. It makes no sense, but it's so effective. And and you just gotta say, well, it's Argento. You just say fuck it. I mean, it's Suspiria alone. I mean, that's one film you just really got to say this is not happening in the reality that we live in. This is a completely different. I mean, this is a fairy tale. This is something completely different. This is not our reality by any means. And I think Suspiria to me is one of the, you put it up there with Texas Chainsaw, Halloween. It's one of the best horror films ever made. I mean, and just the sound of Suspiria, the Goblin soundtrack, the sound effects. Just the first 15 minutes of that film, if you crank that up, like if you have a good sound system that you're watching it on, if you crank that up, that first 15 minutes, by the end of it, you're just like shook. You're just like, what the fuck is going on? And it's like, it literally is maybe a 60-40. Like the sound is more important to what's going on than the visual. And everybody talks about Argento's visuals and how beautiful they are and how I think Eli Roth put it, Argento puts the gore in gorgeous. It's like, but the sound in Suspiria is what really separates that film apart from pretty much anything he'd ever did. I think, Profondo Rosso is probably close behind. Tenebrae at times is kind of like that. I mean, Opera is a good example. But Argento just made certain decisions with his films that I just don't think any other filmmaker would ever think of or even have the balls to think of. Um, but I just love Suspiria, and I love if I were to give you my if you're not familiar with Argento, which I think probably 90% of you guys are, when if you're watching this, but if you're not, I would say my top five, if I were to suggest checking Argento out, Suspiria would be up there, Profondo Rosso, Deep Red, Tenebrae, um, and then I'd probably say Opera and Phenomena would probably be my five that I would say check out. Not necessarily my five favorite Argento films, because to me, I think Four Flies on Grey Velvet, which was like his third film that he directed. He did Bird with the Crystal Plumage first, and Cat o' Nine Tails, and then Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Great titles to begin with, but something about Four Flies on Grey Velvet that I just love from the first time I saw it. It's a little slow at times, but the characters in it are really colorful. Some of the shots in it, I would, if you can get a hold of it. I mean, it's kind of hard to find. There's some releases out there. I mean, we've talked about Severin's release of that here recently, where Severin put out a 4K of Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Said, it's only going to be available this weekend, and they put it up. People bought it. And of course, there were a lot of complaints about it because it's a whole saga. I don't know how to. If I feel like getting into the whole saga of the Four Flies on Grey Velvet and Severin, but pretty much the skinny is they said it was limited, only going to be available online for one weekend. That weekend came and went. And, I didn't get it because it was like $60 for a 4K. I love that film, but I'm just gonna hedge my bet that it's gonna come out in some other form, like a standard edition or something at some point that I can spend $35 on and be fine with. It's it's a beautiful release. It looks fantastic, but so they roll it out for one weekend. They they say it's only chance you're gonna get it. And then from then on out, you see it because Severn usually has a table at most any of the horror conventions that are out there. And people would be showing photos of like, oh, here's Four Flies on Grey Velvet on the table, all over the place. So when Living Dead Weekend rolled around this year, back in June, I don't remember if I told this story or not on here, but I told it to Grande's Graveyard. When I met up with him, I was telling him, Severn has a table, and I noticed that they had the Four Flies on Grey Velvet 4K, which apparently, was supposed to be sold out. And I went up to the guy at the table, and I was looking around, and I did end up picking up that the 5 days 4K that they put out, which is kind of a lost Argento film that I still haven't watched. I started it and kind of got sidetracked, and I need to go back and really give it a shot, because it's one of those. It's not a horror film. It was just it was not successful when it came out. It came out in between Four Flies on Grey Velvet and Profondo Rosso, so it's kind of a forgotten film that not a lot of people talk about. But they did have the Four Flies on Grey Velvet 4K there, and I was looking at it, and the guy was sitting. I don't know who the guy was. He didn't seem to know too much about it. Because he was talking about the 5 days. He was like, yeah, that's the film he made before he did any movie ever. And I was just like, no, I think he did that before. Blah, blah, blah. It was the whole thing. But anyway, he must have thought that I was a real fucking mark when I was looking at this, because I was looking at Four Flies, and there was like one or two copies left on the table. And I was like, I think I asked him, I was like, I thought this was limited, I thought this was like a one weekend thing, I'm surprised to see it. And he's like, oh yeah, those are some extras that we had that we're just kind of trying to get rid of, but that's the last one we got. These are the last two. What you see on here is all we have left. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, how much? And he told me $90 for this fucking 4K. And I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. Gotcha. Put it back down. I was like, well, I'll think about it. I'll come back. Fucking left, never came back. $90. Are you fucking serious? Like, I'm not stupid. Like, I don't care what it is. I mean, but the dude was just like straight faced. Oh yeah, we're probably doing $90 on that, 90 on that. I was like, I'm good, brother. I'll pass on it. I love that film. Getting back to the point, it's a great. That's one of my top five favorite Argento films. But I'm not. I'm good. I still have the DVD from fucking years ago that I picked up, and it's fine for me right now. And like I said, I'm gonna hedge my bets that eventually it's gonna come out in a standard form, and then that's fine with me. But yeah, $90. Kiss my ass. Not a chance in hell. And then, of course, you see weeks later, you see other conventions, the Severn table, and there's a big stack of the fucking Four Flies 4K. I've seen mold, and it's just like, fuck those guys. Like, I don't buy a lot of Severn stuff, anyways, but God, that's just pitiful. But anyway, yeah, I would recommend checking those out. I think Argento's style is completely completely different than anything you're probably gonna see from anybody. Um, and like I said, some people don't like it. Some people, especially a lot of his newer stuff, and I was one of those people that kind of felt the same way. You know, Trauma that came out in '93. Not the biggest fan. I've tried to go back and watch that multiple times. I got the Vinegar Syndrome release that they did. Um, and it's just like one of those films. It's just like, I don't know, man. It just doesn't quite hit for me. And there's, it's got Brad Dourif in it, Ozzy Argento, Piper Laurie, who most people probably remember from like Carrie. She was Carrie's mom. Great cast. I mean, there's something about it just didn't click with me. Sleepless is a good one, a recent one. I actually like a lot of his more recent stuff. When at the time I probably wasn't as big of a fan. Mother of Tears is one that I really came around on. Which is the third, because Suspiria was the start. Inferno was part two of the Three Mothers series, which is kind of the Coven of Witches that they follow. And then Mother of Tears was the final chapter, which they did years and years later. And first time watching it, I think I got halfway through it, and I was just like, I'm not feeling this. This does not feel. And of course, you're younger and you go in with expectations. Um, didn't feel like a Suspiria or something to me. It was a completely different thing. I mean, it's a gruesome fucking movie. I mean, I rewatched it here not long ago for the first time, since I gave it another shot for the first time since I first watched it, and I ended up really liking it this time that I watched it. There's some funny parts in it. One of the parts that I just died laughing. I don't even know why. I don't even. So at one point in the film, there's these group of detectives and they're walking, and then one detective's kind of the serious guy, the other guy is kind of the comedy relief or whatever. That's the thing about Argento's films too, that they're funny. They're Argento's not afraid especially in his like earlier giallos, like Bird with Crystal Plumage and Cat o' Nine Tails. There are certain elements. Four Flies on Grey Velvet. There's a character named God, which is short for Godfrey. And there's certain bits of dialogue in there that are actually pretty witty, and you know, there was a very flamboyantly gay detective in Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Um, that stuff. So I mean, there's Argento has a sense of humor, and I don't think he gets enough credit for his sense of humor that he puts, especially in a lot of his earlier work. But you see that again in Mother of Tears, and there's these two detectives. One's a straight guy, one's comedy relief, and they're looking for Ozzy Argento's character, and they're kind of walking around. The straight detective says something along the lines of, "Okay, everybody, keep your eyes open and your mouth, keep it on the down low. Don't make a big scene of it. You guys go this way, you guys go that way." And the dunce detective or whatever's like, after the one detective's like, don't make a big scene, keep a low profile. It's like, you go this way, you go that way. The dunce, the comedy relief detective's like, "Okay, everybody, you go this way, you go that way, let's go." And makes it, and the fucking reaction of the straight detective is just like, he just glares at him for a second. It just shakes his head and continues walking. It's just like that subtle thing. I don't know why it fucking tickled me shitless, man. I can't explain it, but I really liked Mother of Tears. Um, as the years went on, I gave it another shot with fresh eyes, kind of like what I tried to do with Survival of the Dead last week. But that one just, man, it gets harder and harder every time I watch that fucking movie. Um, But yeah, a lot of his newer stuff, a lot of people are not big fans of, but I like it probably more than most. The Card Player is another one that I ended up really liking. He did an episode of the Masters of Horror series, which I think Dead Pit, shout out. Dead Pit's actually doing a retrospective on that, coming up here soon. But he did one called Jennifer, and it's a fucked up, disturbing little little fucking I don't know what you'd call it. I guess it was an episode. I mean, it's like a mini movie. It's like an hour long movie. But yeah, I enjoyed that one a whole lot. But anyway, I'm babbling on here about Dario, and like I said at the beginning, the one big thing that I think Dario did to that contributed to me and Dawn and my love for Dawn of the Dead, George Romero, is that Dawn of the Dead does not happen without Dario Argento. Dario comes to the U.S., meets, I believe, meets with Richard Rubenstein in New York, tells him, here's what I want. I think Dario and his partners, which I think Gornick refers to them as the Italians, kind of laid down the money and was like, look, well, whatever you guys can raise on your own, we'll match. And I think they ended up getting $500,000. I think Argento's group ended up donating or not donating, but funding about $500,000 of Dawn of the Dead. And in return, they would get, uh, international, no, I guess they they say international rights, but it's basically non-English speaking countries. So you'd see Argento's version in Italy, of course, France, Germany, anywhere in Europe where they didn't speak English. Argento got that part of the world. Romero and Rubenstein would get the U.S., all of North America, I believe, the UK, I think. So they basically just split it 50-50. And Argento ended up flying Romero to Rome to write the script. Now, there's been differing versions of the story. Did Dario fly George out to kind of supervise and make sure? Because I've heard from some that George himself was just like, we'd go to Rome. Dario put me up in a little apartment. It was George and his girlfriend, soon to be wife, Christine at the time. Put him up in a little apartment. I think they were there for 2 or 3 weeks. And George banged out the screenplay for Dawn of the Dead. And George's take on it was he would write all day. They'd get together with Dario at night, have dinner, and go over what he had written. And pretty much from what George said, Dario just said, you make the film you want to make. I mean, that's a quote from George. Dario, you make the film you want to make. Dario had complete trust and belief in George's abilities and his vision. And you can't say enough about Dario doing that for George. Because I mean, you're putting up a lot of money, and you're going to put your name on this film in many, many countries around the world. You would think 99% of the people, especially with egos and all of the shit that people have in Hollywood and film and art in general, if you're a creative person like Argento was, working with another creative person, you want your input. Most of the time, you're going to want to put your own input and your own influence into things. But pretty much from what I've understood, just from George talking about it, Christine talking about it, they just flew George and Christine to Rome, put them up in an apartment, and said, write the film. And they'd get together, talk about it at the end of the night, and that was that. And apparently Dario didn't have hardly any input or any ideas. He wasn't like, oh, George, how about we put some zombies over here and then the zombies can do this? No, it was just Dario saying, okay, what did you do today? And then George would tell him, and Dario would listen, and they would kind of. And Dario was just curious. He was like, okay, where's the story going next, type of thing. And I don't think you can. I don't think Dario gets the credit enough for doing that. And of course, Dario later on would go on to help finance and do things for Lamberto Bava with Demons and Demons 2, The Church, which was directed by, I'm going to butcher the fuck out of this name. It's Michel Soavi. That's 99% sure that that's not how it's pronounced, but that's how I just pronounced it. But he would go on to help other filmmakers, and it was never a thing where Dario wanted input, or he would say, "Oh, you have to do this," or "Well, I'll make this film, but you have to put this actor in it, or you have to put this plot line." None of that. It was just Dario saying, "I believe in George. I I've seen what he can do with Night of the Living Dead. I've seen what he can do with Martin. I want I want his film. I just want to be able to, produce it, present it, yada yada yada." And of course, Dario did have his the ability to recut Dawn and do what he wanted to do with it. And of course, we'd get to the cut of the Argento cut of Dawn of the Dead, which would going to be called Zombie overseas. So Argento did have the ability to recut Dawn, but in terms of just content and characters and plot and stuff like from all accounts, he had no say and no interest in having a say um, in what George did with Dawn of the Dead. So George was pretty much able to write his vision, and Dario would say, "Make your film." And of course, I think Gornick actually mentioned on the commentary from that I was listening to the other night that Dario would sign off or something on the script every night. He'd look at what George wrote and it's like, okay, this is good. But from from what George, from what George would say, that Dario just had no input, was or not no input, but you know what I mean. Dario was just like, it's your vision, it's your film, you do what you want to do, and that's fantastic. And then there was actually a point when they were filming Dawn of the Dead that Dario flew to America, flew to Pittsburgh, and visited the set for a couple of hours. He was there the night they were shooting the stuff with the Scirocco car, going around locking up the entrances and stuff like that. And according to Michael Gornick, he was there for maybe a couple of hours. Walked around, just kind of he'd look, he'd look in the camera every now and then just to see what. And apparently, he was just blown away that they were shooting as fast and doing as many setups as they were doing in such a short period of time. Because in Italy they would spend, especially Argento. I mean, that's Argento and his camera movements and his shots. I mean, Argento could give a shit about the actors or their performances 9 times out of 10, but um, but his camera movements and just that's what Dario is interested in. So he would look and see, and Gornick brought this up. He was like, the only thing that Dario ever said, he kind of want to look in Mike's camera, the only thing Dario ever said to him, he just kind of look at him and say, "It's love, it's love." And Gornick was like, "Yeah, yeah, it's love, all right." But I love that quote. It's love, it's love. Um, but yeah, he visited for a couple hours, just kind of walked around, just checked everything out, see how everything was going. There's actually a photo, I believe, of him, George, and Rubenstein, if I'm not mistaken, or it may have just been him and George. Um, I have to go back and look at the photo, but they're standing right there in front of the entrance where they were shooting. Where they were locking up the entrance and stuff with the Scirocco. So Dario's really only input came after the film was made in the can, and he got to recut it and re-edit it for non-English speaking audiences, which we touched on earlier, which I think was mostly just for dubbing reasons, which is the same thing that the U.S. did with the U.S. versions of like Profondo Rosso and Suspiria. Just cut out a lot of the dialogue and get to make it get to the action a little quicker. And that's pretty much what Dario's cut is. And a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, Argento's cut is terrible. And I mean, it is one of those things. It's like the the first time I saw it, it was in that four disc box set that Anchor Bay did from Dawn of the Dead back in 2004, I believe. And the first time watching it, it was a little disorienting because it was one of those. I mean, shit. At that point, I'd probably watched Dawn of the Dead countless times at that point. So it was like watching your favorite film for the first time all over again. Different score. There's different scenes. There's different bits of dialogue. There's different. I mean, it's a different film in a lot of ways. And I think the thing that really separates it from George's version, it is a shorter version, but I think the thing that separates it really is the soundtrack. Um, of course, Goblin, which I think George originally I think reached out to Donald Rubinstein to do the soundtrack for, because I mean he had just worked with Donald on Martin, so obviously when Dawn was coming up, he reached out to Donald and said, "Hey, I got a new gig. Would you want to take a shot at the score?" I've listened to that score, the Rubinstein Dawn of the Dead score. I don't think it was what George had in mind. Um, and listening to it, I couldn't imagine um, that music in Dawn of the Dead. Um, so I think George was kind of open to the idea of maybe having somebody else do the score. So I think Argento kind of said, well, I have Goblin, and I'm for my version, I'm going to have Goblin do the score. And he kind of let George say, have a say, and he's like, okay, but you can use the Goblin score when you want. If you don't want it, don't worry about it. And George ended up using quite a bit of the Goblin score. I know, the main Dawn of the Dead theme, of course, is used. Um, there's quite a few tracks. There's like, I want to say George used like 3 tracks from. Well, no, actually, thinking about it in the actual U.S. cut, he used more 3 in the original soundtrack, um, but he definitely used a few others. I want to say probably 5 or 6 different tracks from that. But the rest, well, like the first time I had listened to the Dawn of the Dead soundtrack, there was a shopping mall that me and my family would go to every Saturday. We'd meet up. There was a Godfather's Pizza, and we would all meet up at this Godfather's Pizza, order a shitload of pizzas, hang out, talk, bullshit. And I was, teenager at the time. Me and my cousin, we'd just go walk through the mall and we'd just get into shit. I mean, I grew up in this mall basically, which that may be why Dawn has such a effect on me, why it worked on me the way it did. Um, I grew up in a fucking mall. Maybe it's all clicking now. But in this mall, there was a music store at the time called Sound Shop, and they had this little kiosk where you could go and look up music. You could look up CDs to see if they had it in the store, and little headphones, kind of like these, that you could put on and listen to it and kind of sample it for like 30-second little clips, kind of like you can do on iTunes if you want to buy something. But the first time I listened, I looked up. I was like, could it be do they have the Dawn of the Dead soundtrack? So I looked it up. They didn't have it, of course. They never. You couldn't find that soundtrack anywhere. It's crazy to think how readily available everything is now. I mean, you get vinyl releases of Dawn of the Dead, and I mean, there's releases out the ass of the stuff now. But back in the day, I mean, it was hard to find. I mean, this stuff was pretty fucking rare. So when I found it on this little kiosk, I would just go like every week, like a psycho. I would just go to this kiosk and fucking listen to this soundtrack. And of course, the opening track, it's like, man, this is from the movie. And then the second track is like, yeah. And then as you get through and you're hearing some of these, you're like, where is this in the movie? Like the pie in the face and or torta a fascia or whatever. I don't speak Italian, so but a lot of the stuff that was on the actual Dawn of the Dead soundtrack is not in the US version. So like the first time I'm listening to that, I'm just like, where is this in the film? Like, this is cool, but I don't remember any of this. Um, so in the US version, George used like a handful of the tracks and then filled the rest in with, just endless amounts of library music from all over. I mean, and George loved doing that at the time because, of course, George edited the film and was, huge on, library tracks at the time for whatever reason. I mean, George loved library music to kind of fill in. And in Dario's version, it's more of it's a wall to wall. It's a score. It's a goblin score. Every bit of music, well, I wouldn't say every bit, but like 90% of the music in Zombie is goblin. And to me, in my opinion, I don't know if I like the Argento cut as much. It's definitely interesting. It's definitely something that I'll pop in and watch every now and then just to kind of relive it. I don't know. I guess the best way I could put it is just kind of watch Dawn of the Dead again in a different way. But I will say that the Goblin soundtrack, that there's an actual score to Dawn of the Dead, maybe adds a little bit to the film. I know that the music that they use for the biker scene, I can't think of what it's called. Terra, fuck, I can't remember it. It's some Italian thing, but it's like the rocking like I think that works awesome for that. But there are some things where it's like a little over, like they use the zombie track a little too much, where like every time there's any action or anything happening, it's just yeah, and it's just like at some point you're just like, God damn, this is a little much. But but I do think it kind of makes the film feel a little more cohesive, that there's one score through the whole thing. Whereas Romero's, it's like at one point you're just like you're listening to the Goblin, main theme, and then all of a sudden you're listening to, the John Wayne music at the end. I don't know. It can be off-putting to some people, I'm sure, but yeah, I love that score. I love, I love Goblin. I mean, the Suspiria soundtrack, the Deep Red soundtrack, Tenebrae. I mean, oh, God, love that band. They're actually playing close to me sometime here soon. I'd like to check them out. I don't know if I'll be able to because it's just one of those things where it's like I'd have to drive probably to Indianapolis, and it's probably going to be on like a Tuesday night or something. And I don't know if I'll be able to, but it's one of those things that I just feel like I have to. I think they're doing the Demons soundtrack or something all the way through, which is one thing that they do that's pretty cool, where they'll go through and show the movie and then play the soundtrack live over the movie. I mean, I would just love to check it out, see how that works. But yeah, I do think Argento's cut is definitely different. There are aspects of it that I like better than the U.S. version, but for the most part, as a whole, I do prefer George's cut. I think it's when I say George's cut, there's so many cuts of Dawn of the Dead, it's hard to really pinpoint. And of course, there's the complete cut or whatever, which is like 2.5 hours long or whatever. Um, but for me, the cans cut, the longer version, that's the one that I like. There are aspects of the U.S. version that I like better than that one, but I think as a whole, I just love, especially the second. I just think that there's more character building there. You get inside the characters a little more in that cut, whereas Dario's version, it's more built on the action and the gore and all that. Although there is a scene in the Dario Argento version that I think is telling. I don't know why George kind of cut it out. It is a little out of character for Flyboy, but after they get through the first time going through the mall and they get back up and they kill the Hare Krishna zombie and they're kind of hanging out. There's the scene where Flyboy's just kind of sitting there and they're listening to the radio and they're talking about Philly's gone to shit, and Flyboy's just kind of like, and it's the attitude that I think most people have when you talk about the zombie apocalypse and like, oh, how would you deal with the zombies or whatever. Flyboy kind of has that, where it's like, oh, what's the big deal? They're so slow. I mean, they're so easy to kill. You just got to do what you got to do. Fuck it. And Peter's quick to kind of reel it back into reality and be like, when this is what I say to most people, that are just like, oh, if the zombie apocalypse happened, I would just load up on guns and just go on a fucking killing spree and blah 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 because it's fun. I don't know. So at some point in our society, the idea of mass murdering fucking zombies became appealing. Don't know. But Peter does a good job of reeling them in to be like, okay, so let's say the lady gets killed. Speaking of Fran, you gonna be able to chop her head off, and it kind of reminds Flyboy like, oh yeah, like I don't know, and that's you ask me that question. I'd like to say that I'd be in a jeep with a fucking Tommy gun, fucking mowing down zombies or whatever. That people have these weird fantasies, like you see those fucking geeks with jeeps that say like zombie hunting machine or something on the back. I just want to be like, what's wrong with you people? Just to fucking go off about that. Sorry, this is my second glass of scotch, so I'm kind of just kind of going off the cuff here. But if I had to like chop my mom's head off or like kill a loved one, I mean that's what'll get you in the end is your inability to do what needs to be done. Anyway, there's a scene in Argento's version that touches on that's not in any of either one of the U.S. or the cans cut in the U.S. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I enjoy it for what it is. I like some of the music cues, but for me, I mean, I actually grew up watching the cans cut over and over, and that's maybe why I like that better. But I mean, I just think to me the second round of the shopping where they're the first montage where they're shopping, it's all fun, and Roger's got the whatever you call it, the little thing you see, and you're like, oh, ha, ha, and they're playing basketball and they're having a good old time. They're in the arcade, and then Roger dies, and then it's like there's the second um, shopping montage in the cans cut where it's a little more somber, a little more melancholy. It's more of like, well, it's kind of day to day life at this point. We're just kind of, you see Steven typing on the typewriter, and I can't think of off the top of my head of what he types, but he takes the picture of Fran and friends. It's like, great. When you finish the roll, we'll drop it off at the drugstore, and just walk. It kind of hammers home like, okay, we've been here for quite a while. The new factors worn off, and we're a little, it is what it is at this point. Um, I love that. I just you see these people starting to just kind of deteriorate mentally, where they're just like, okay, well, the mission's accomplished, and we're safe, and we have everything we want. And at first, it's awesome, but after a while, it's just like it's not. It's not. As Romero was quoted as saying, domesticity is not all it's cracked up to be. So that's kind of a lesson that I've learned when I was younger and just kind of carried on in my life, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's not a good lesson to carry on, but I try to remind myself that when, um, what's the Jerry Seinfeld quote? It's like if you don't have if stuff isn't if having stuff isn't making you happy, then you don't have the right stuff. That's like American mentality right there, 100%. But so yeah, Argento's version of Dawn came out before before Romero's. Romero was having trouble getting distribution here in the U.S. So Dario's version ended up coming out overseas and it was a huge success, which is surprising that no distributor here in the U.S. would give it a shot because of course they wanted to make it an R rating and Romero just refused. Whereas I think they were a little more lax about that kind of stuff overseas. But I mean, when it came out, in Italy and France, and I have, I pulled a few of the cooler releases from overseas that I have just to kind of show. But I mean, there's a ton. I mean, it was huge overseas. I mean, you can see what it inspired, especially in Italy with Fulci, um, and guys like Bruno Mattei. There were so many Dawn of the Dead knockoffs that came out from, especially in Italy after Dawn of the Dead came out. And of course, there are people that'll argue that like, oh, Fulci had the idea for Zombie before Dawn of the Dead came out. And maybe not. I don't know. But it is two completely different type of zombie films. But there are definitely some influences um, that you can see in Fulci's Zombie that you can see where he got it from. I think we all know where he got it from. But zombies became just a big thing, and especially in Italy in the early '80s. I mean, Fulci did, Zombie, City of the Living Dead, House by the Cemetery, and then you had Bruno Mattei's Hell of the Living Dead. I mean, there were just zombie movies coming out left and right in Italy, just one knockoff after another, and most of them were terrible. But there were some good ones. Fulci's Zombie is fantastic, and I love Hell of the Living Dead. I think it's one of the best worst movies ever made. Um, and that is a complete obvious ripoff of Dawn of the Dead, just down to the soundtrack from Goblin. Um, Holy shit! I mean, the four characters in the film are SWAT guys dressed exactly like Peter and Roger. I mean, it's funny as shit. Um, but yeah, it was a huge success overseas, and eventually, Romero did get distribution for his, but yeah. I mean, and of course, Dario and George would go on to work together years later on Two Evil Eyes, which is another stream altogether that I want to do at another time. I don't want to get into it now. It's one of those films that I'm not the biggest fan of. It's one of those films that I feel like I need to go back. I do this all the time. It's almost like once a year. I'll be like, man, I really need to go back and revisit Two Evil Eyes. And then I do, and I'm like, well, it's not as bad as I remember, but then like I'll just move on and forget about it. So I really want to kind of do a stream, break it down, and just kind of lay out my thought. Why does it not? Why does it? I mean, it's literally my two favorite filmmakers, Argento and Romero, uh, making one film together, and it just doesn't. It doesn't work for whatever reason. It just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't do anything for me. So yeah, I'll touch on that at a different time, on a different stream. But I just wanted to, like I said, I pulled off a few different international releases of Dawn of the Dead that were of the Argento cut. Just kind of show here what's out there. But I mean, there's a ton overseas. I mean, I know a lot of people complain and have issues with Richard Rubenstein. Because there's not a ton of releases of Dawn of the Dead in the U.S. For me personally, yeah, it sucks, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad that Richard's not just pimping out fucking Dawn of the Dead, Martin left and right. He did end up. I think he ended up. I know he owns Martin and Dawn of the Dead outright. Salah Hassanine, I think, owned the rights to Night Riders, Creep Show, Day of the Dead, and I think those went to Taurus Entertainment when they bought out United Film Distribution or whatever. Which is why you've gotten just tons of knockoff Day of the Dead remakes and Creep Show 3 and just one pile of shit after another. So the fact that there's not a lot of Dawn of the Dead or Martin releases in the US, I'm fine with. They're out there. If you want it, you can find it. If you, like I said, there's the second site release from the UK. If you want it, you can find it. It's out there. Just get it. I'm totally fine not having a new release of Dawn of the Dead every Halloween like they do with, John Carpenter's Halloween or Evil Dead or those films that they just fucking have. There's 1,000 different releases, and it's just like, I would lose my mind, like, because I would have to have all of them. And if I was a huge, which Dana Evil Dead chick, if I was in your shoes and I was a huge Evil Dead fan, I would have fucking hung myself in the closet years ago. Because I would be obsessed with collecting everything that came out. And there's been so many releases of Evil Dead and Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 and all that shit that I wouldn't be able to keep up. I would just be like, so thank God that my obsession is Dawn of the Dead and George Romero, and Richard Rubenstein isn't releasing a version of Dawn of the Dead every year. But there are a lot of releases overseas. And the first one that really comes to mind is this one that was released here in the U.S. It was actually the first U.S. release, I believe, of Argento's cut of Zombie, Dawn of the Dead. It's got the. I love that poster too. I just think it's the weirdest, just the weirdest artwork, but I love it. It's so European. I keep hitting this mic. I apologize. But yeah, this came out from Anchor Bay. I mean, this is what 2005. So this is about a year after that box set came out. So, um, and then years later, they did a 4K restoration over in Italy. I'm not a huge fan of this cover. It looks, I mean, it really is just Crimson Mask, as JR would say, or Gordon Soley. But the transfer, the 4K transfer on this thing is fantastic. And it also has, I mean, there's a ton of special features and stuff on here that I can't get any enjoyment out of because I don't speak Italian. This is from overseas, this is from Italy. This came out prior to the second site release. Let me show you. So prior to the second site release, this is the 4K box set. It's got, the European cut, of course, the Argento cut in 4K. It's got the Blu-rays. And this does have a full frame version, Blu-ray of the Argento cut, which are the best way that I can describe that is it's a rough cut of the film because I guess when they sent Argento the negatives or whatever to edit together, you see everything. Like a lot of the time, a lot of the shots in films, like they'll shoot it on a certain lens and then they'll zoom in and like cut out, they'll crop out certain portions. This has none of that. I mean, this is a raw, and you'll see like, Robert Williams, with the boom operator, just standing there on the side of the screen at one point. Like it's a trip to fucking watch. I would recommend this. That's really the main reason I ended up picking this up because I think I spent $75-$80 on this thing back when I got it. And that was one of the main reasons why I got it was to see this full framed unmatted version. And it's definitely cool to watch. You'll definitely see it's so weird because it's like you're looking into a window you've been looking into the same window for years and years and years, and you've been seeing the same thing, and then all of a sudden you see the window widens up a little bit, you see a little bit more. It's crazy. But yeah, there's a German DVD that came out, I want to say 2002. When I first saw this, I was like, Zombie 7. What the fuck where's Zombie 1 through 6? But it's actually Zombie 1. It looks like a 7 though, so I was like, what the hell is Zombie 7? But it's just a weird DVD. I love that cover. It makes Flyboy look way cool. It looks like he's the way coolest member of this group. But yeah, this was from 2002 in Germany. I believe this was a German release as well, but this is the complete cut from Dawn of the Dead, where it pretty much takes every version of Dawn of the Dead and cuts it all together into one. I love this artwork. It's a steel book. This came out, let's see, a year, 2017, from XT Video Entertainment. It's a Blu-ray, and like I said, it's the complete cut. It's 156 minutes. Which is crazy. It's over 2.5 hours long, but it's literally everything that there is to see in Dawn of the Dead cut into one. It looks fantastic. They did a really great job on it. There was a release called the red version from years and years ago that somebody put together over in Germany, I believe, where I think they just cut it all together from VHS tapes, and this looks fantastic. And like I said, this cover is just beautiful. I just love that cover. I think that goes for pretty good money now too. This is another one. This is like a 3D release, I think, from Germany as well. This one's kind of hard to find. I don't have a 3D projector or anything, so I don't know why I bought it, but it was fairly inexpensive at the time, and I was like, why not? Maybe one day I'll get a 3D projector and check it out. But it's got the 2D and 3D version on this. And I think this goes for pretty good money now too. So, but yeah. So I think those were the German. I think I have one more German release here. It's a media book version, I believe. It's got the 4K I'm just, use where this camera is. It's got the 4K disc. It's got the little booklet inside. I don't speak German. I can't read German, so it's really here's that photo that I was talking about earlier of George and Dario at the entrance of the mall when Dario came in for his visit with George on the set. It's a great photo. I love that photo. But yeah, I don't speak German. I don't know what any of this shit says. Like I said, owning these foreign versions of Dawn of the Dead kind of sucks because there's so many like interviews and commentaries. There's a Claudio Simonetti commentary on one of these that there's no subtitles for, and I don't speak Italian. Um, so I need to translate some of this shit. I need to get Google Translate or something and just kind of hold it to the speaker and play 15, 20 seconds, pause it, and see what the hell's going on. I'm the kind of psycho that would do that. So then I have this French box set. Came out, not sure the year, but it's amazing. This is the box set that actually has the commentary I was talking about earlier with Mike Gornick and Tom Dubinsky. And I mean, it gets chock full of awesome little goodies here. It's got this. It's got a book on George's career, which I think I have this actually in English, but this one's in French. These, in this little bit right here, these are actually some reprint 8x10s of some behind the scenes stuff from Dawn of the Dead. There's George and Mike Gornick. It's a color photo while they're shooting on the ice rink. I loved getting these. I was surprised. I wasn't expecting to get that. I really just got that box set for that commentary. It's Fran. Wonderful, wonderful picture of George and Christine there. I love that. Love that photo. I actually maybe should frame these and put them up, but there's Tom Savini and Marty Schiff. Yeah, I'd love to frame them and put them up, but when I have like box sets and collections like this, I kind of like to keep it all together. But yeah. But anyway, that's just to kind of give you guys an idea of Dawn of the Dead's international reach, because and a lot of the artwork and stuff from overseas, I just love. I can't get enough of. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, big thank you to Dario Argento, a true genius filmmaker. But just like I said, Dawn of the Dead. Maybe the film happens in some iteration, but it's not the film that we know and love without Dario. So cheers to Dario. Beautiful scotch. And yeah, well, just what a great team. And like I said, I'll do another stream. We'll touch on Two Evil Eyes at some other point. Maybe do like a watch along or something with that, because like I said, it's been a while since I watched it. Like I'll try to revisit it once a year or something like that to see maybe if it grows on me over time. But it's just one of those that just misses the mark. But we'll, like I said, we'll do a stream on it at some point and really go into it, because I think it's just a weird mystery to me of why that film just doesn't work. I can't pinpoint it. I was kind of able to do that with Survival of the Dead last weekend, though, where I think the main thing that's missing from that film for me was just the undertone of just foreboding doom that Romero's films, his zombie films, have. It's like even in Dawn, when they're the lighter moments, the more comedic moments or whatever, there's still this, underlying, doom feeling. I don't know, where it's like this is the end of the world. It's like every now and then you're jarred back into, oh yeah, the world is coming to an end. Fuck. And Survival of the Dead, I just feel like doesn't have that at all. It's just more of like, well, this is what we're doing now, so let's do it. And I don't know. Maybe I'll like it again. 1911 Guitar Dude. Don't know if I've seen you here, man. Welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for sharing your different editions of Dawn. Many of the foreign releases are really interesting. I saw Argento's cut opened up on the Perfect Collection Laserdisc and thought it was really cool to see. That's one thing. I'm not a huge Laserdisc collector. Um, that's one thing I see sometimes that I'm tempted to pick up every now and then. But I think it's just a nostalgia thing for me. I don't think I was of that era. Like when I was growing up, it was all VHS. So I do have plenty of VHS tapes that have sentimental value or whatever. But yeah, Laserdisc that was just a little bit after or before my time, I think. Uh, but there are definitely some stuff out there that I would love to have. Mostly Dawn of the Dead stuff and whatnot. So maybe at some point I'll pick one up. But that's But yeah, good to see you, man. I appreciate you chiming in. But I'm gonna hop off here. I appreciate everybody checking this out tonight. I hope, and for anybody checking it out after the fact, I know it's a Monday night. We all got work. Um, Tomorrow, I feel 10 times better tonight than I did yesterday. Thank God. And I'm glad I was able to get on here and kind of babble on about Argento and Romero and any opportunity I get to talk about Dawn of the Dead in any capacity, I'm going to do it. So I appreciate everybody checking it out. I'll be back next week. Like I said, I'm working on that, getting that commentary up with Gornick and Dubinsky on the Argento cut. I think that's going to be pretty exciting for a lot of people to see and hear for the first time. But I don't know what I'm going to do stream wise next week. I know I've been teasing doing a live auction on here at some point. I have a shitload of stuff that I wouldn't mind getting rid of to make a little more room to buy some more shit that I can fill it with. So that's definitely still in the works. I'm still just trying to work out some of the more logistical aspects of it. I've never done one before, so we'll see how it works, and we'll see what we can do with it. But yeah, so until next weekend, I'll see you guys then. Have a great rest of the week, and as always, and I said this every week, and it rings true. Stay scared.